Last weekend I was speaking in Jamestown, North Dakota, and dashed back to Colorado just in time to catch an airplane. Spent 2.5 days in Washington, got back, left there on a Friday, and so it's one of those kinds of things. But it is so wonderful to be here. And Ron said, "Would you mind going to a kind of a church plant?" And well, I spent 13 years as the director for Global Mission or Adventist Mission. And of course, our main business was planting churches in the 1040 window, which is that territory between the Straits of Gibraltar, Morocco, Spain, all the way around to Japan. And in that little window, you have about 9% of the Seventh-day Adventists, and the rest live somewhere else, and yet you had 70% of the world's population that live in that rectangle. And so as we entered into that movement in 1990, why, I think of northern India. They had 650 million people who lived there, and we had 14 churches that were spread across that 650 million people. Now, if you go there, there are probably somewhere just a little beyond 5,000 churches scattered across that window. And of course, these are areas that are predominantly, Muslim and Hindu. There's other groups that live in there. But I think of the former Soviet Union. And, we didn't hardly have anything out in Siberia, just a little presence. But in the process of the last 25 years, there have been thousands of new churches planted across that vast territory. Some of them operate in very difficult circumstances. As a matter of fact, in March, my wife and I will be conducting a 2-week evangelism effort in Siberia. And in March, in case you're wondering, that makes North Dakota seem like Florida. And so we'll be looking forward to that. And there's a team that's working over there right now. And but I think of China. China, just in 1990, we had 18,000 Seventh-day Adventists we knew of in China. And today, probably 420,000 Adventists in China. And so the church is growing and expanding all across that vast territory. And and then of course, as being the one in charge of that, organizing it, but probably not doing very much, I had an opportunity to visit a lot of church plants. And if I have my choice, I will go to a new church plant to worship every Sabbath. And yet I've had my opportunity to speak in certain places. I remember going into a stadium in Angola, and they told me I'd be speaking twice that morning. We went to the first place to speak and walked into a stadium, and there were 20,000 people seated in the stadium. And they told me that this stadium only held 20,000, but that these were the people who had been baptized in the past 9 months. Oh. And so we finished, I spoke to them, we finished that meeting, left, went to another stadium that had 40,000 people in it, and these were the people that were just invited, but they got in by lottery ticket. And so that's the number of Adventists that you see in some of the places in Africa. And so I do have opportunity to speak to larger groups where Adventism has been, but I would take a church plant any day. There's just an excitement about it, and there's the courage of those who are willing to step forward. Okay, I've given you a little world report, and I always try to do that a little bit. There's many things I could say. I could talk the rest of the afternoon about different situations in different places around the world. I am the assistant to Ted Wilson at the General Conference. I work half-time. He asked me if I would stay on as vice president. I told him, no, we have my wife's parents who live with us. And so we, care for them has taken on a different dimensions. But I found out something about half-time employment for Ted Wilson. It's the same hours, half the money. So I don't know that it's any less. I do get to live in Colorado. And so that's the one advantage. But I still am on the road quite a bit and have various assignments around the world. I do have a few things I always like to do before I speak. I run a couple continuous advertisements. I like to do two things. One is I like to give an advertisement for young people and children. And I'll take care of that right now very quickly. We need our young people and children in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And as I look at most church plants, they come in because people transfer, and then there are people who come in who do not necessarily have children. If there is a focus to this group, and I had any advice to give you, I would advise that you find people who are between 20 and 30 years old, and they have about 15 kids. And bring them into this church, because that is the future. When you look out at a church like this, if you don't cross that bridge and move into that, and I'm a person who has probably over the last 25 years, when I did not direct Global Mission, I was the chairman of that committee. We reviewed probably 3,000 or 4,000 plans, church plant plans every year. And that is the bridge you have to cross. You have to have young people seated in these pews. That we need them. We face a tremendous challenge of the 1040 window. I can't even begin to describe to you the challenge that we face in the Middle East. There are 500 cities there of more than 1 million. On this Sabbath, they have finished their hours just recently in the Middle East on Sabbath. And they will be very fortunate across that vast territory of nearly 600 million people to have 2,000 people come to church. And I can name, we have analyzed every city of 1 million or more. And I can tell you that there are 8 cities in which we do not know that there has ever been a Seventh-day Adventist enter that city. And that includes lay people, even on business trips. They've never gone there. 8 cities. And some of the one city is about 4 million people. And so it's a huge challenge that we face. How are we going to do that? How are we going to go to the Stans? How are we planning to go to Western China and to enter into those groups there? And what used to be Inner Mongolia, now it's China. Very difficult to work in those areas. Well, I'll tell you how it's going to happen. It's going to happen through the power of the Holy Spirit, but it's going to happen through young people who come out of our seminaries and training programs that have different ideas and have good questions to ask. That's how it's going to happen. My generation has passed on, and I can tell you from looking at the group here, we're all in middle age right now. It's going to be that younger generation that comes, and we need not only in entering China, but in making an impact in the city of Colby, Kansas. You need young people who are part and parcel of what's taking place here. I recently heard about a little girl who was looking at her mom. She said, "Mom," she said, "you have 2 gray hairs. Where did you get those?" And mother, she sensed an opportunity. She said, every time you do something naughty, she said, "I get another one of these gray hairs." The little girl, she thought about that for just a minute. And she said, "Mom, can I ask you a question?" "Yeah." She says, "Why is Grandma's hair all gray?" We need young people who can ask these questions and have a certain perspective. So anyway, I've given my advertisement on young people. I was very touched, and I hear this continually where I go from place to place. Please remember my children in prayer. Please remember, and we know that sometimes our children struggle, but I'll tell you, never, ever give up. Never. The Lord has plans for them. And you can find it in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Those plans are good plans. That's what the Lord has in mind for them. And so I think if we continually bring them up, we will find that we can bring them in. That's my advertisement for young people. Get them in your church. Do everything you can. And that you have them. Have a branch Sabbath school. Come here. Bring them week by week. Find the people who are in foster homes. What a tremendous testimony. Go there. Bring them to the church. The other thing that I like to do is I like to leave particularly a new church plant with some method. I've seen all kinds of methods put down on paper. And obviously, how do you impact this community? Well, particularly in North America. Church planting is taking place in North America, and so is church growth. It is not dead. But I can tell you that considering the secular society that we live in, It's not set up a tent and put the 4 beasts coming out of the sea on the front page of the paper and say, come to the meeting. I will tell you now that there is a percentage of the population that respond to that, but I'm not sure you want them as members here. And so it is a thing that we have to take the counsel of what Ellen White really talks about. What does she talk about? Well, she read the book Evangelism. Look, read the book Gospel Workers. Read the book Christian Service, and you'll find chapters in there called Methods. And I'll tell you what, it is connecting with them in a way that has meaning to them. And I think that we're seeing a resurgence of the statement that Ellen White said that the health work is the right arm of the message. And that we know that we live in a time when people face unprecedented health challenges. Yes. And they are looking for answers. And so I ran across something recently. It is called the 28 program. I'll just share it with you quickly. And I just happen to have some of the books. My wife and I go very few places without them. It's called Live to 101. And it's actually a book written by Mark Finley and Peter Landless, who is the Director of Health for the General Conference. And it's a book that actually has come out with several different covers, and you may have seen it. This has had a distribution of probably 40 million worldwide. South America handed out 25 million of these alone. And there's actually a different cover the Pacific Press has now that actually is a little better than this one. And but it's called the 28 program. How's that work? It's just very simple. You know, you face 2 challenges. One challenge is you have to connect with your neighbors. Yeah. You want to know what the other challenge is? Is to get Seventh-day Adventists to do something. I will tell you now. It's the absolute truth. The data, I can show it to you. It's very difficult because of what I expressed in Sabbath school. Most of you were here. We have convinced you that you're not really involved in mission unless you're involved in communicating the 28 fundamentals. And that is important. I believe in it. I'm a firm believer in evangelism and giving Bible studies, all of that kind of thing. But I think our work would be 100 times more effective if we would also begin with the right arm of the message or something that builds inroads. This is basically a health book. This is a book that tells you how to keep your blood pressure down. It tells you how to lower your cholesterol, to drink water, the benefits of exercise. It's based on data out of Loma Linda University. And how do you live longer? And the Loma Linda Health Study. Many of you may have been part of that. And but it's a program called the 28 program. I'll very quickly go through that. What do we mean by the 28 program? Okay, keep in mind the 2 challenges: connecting with your neighbor and getting Adventists to do something. If I come along and I say to Seventh-day Adventists, you know, I want you to, we're starting a 6-week evangelism series, and we're going to meet every night. You know, it's real hard to get them to come to that every night. This is Seventh-day Adventists. It's also very difficult to have them bring somebody. It is. I'm just telling you how it is. And, but yet, if you work on methods that actually creates a possibility, you will find that it's a different response. The 28 program. It goes something like this. How many people this week would have 60 seconds out of the 604,000 seconds that will be available to you to spend on frontline mission? If I were to ask you that question, would you raise your hand? I have 60 seconds. Who would have 60 seconds? Okay? Probably all of you would. All right? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'd like to have each of you take this book. It's a health book. And it talks about practical things that are killing people today and how to avoid them. It's how you could live to 101 years old. And I would like you to find one person this next week, out of the whole week, out of all those seconds, I'd like you to find one person to give it to. And make sure that you know who they are. It could be your next door neighbor, cousin, the person at the bank, dry cleaners. It could be somebody at the grocery store, somebody that you happen to know. And usually the conversation goes something like this. I thank you. You know, it's been so great to get to know you. And people like you ought to live longer. I've been reading this book, and you pull out one out of 50 of them. as though you've been giving them to everyone in the neighborhood. But I have been reading this book, and it is fantastic. It's just real simple. I want to give it to you. And it's just on how you can just practice some simple things and live longer. You know, I've seen so many, and my wife and I, we always kind of have a contest. She'll come back from town and go, ha, gave away 7 books. And I've been home all day, you know. Or I'll come back from a trip and go, you know, I gave away some. Well, recently we were at the county fair in Montrose, and we went down there. Judy and I she's a nurse practitioner. We were running kind of a health thing at the fairs. We gave away probably more than 3,500 of these at the fair, along with at least that many children's Bible stories and books, and I don't know how many pieces of literature we gave away in total there. But basically, I would just say, now, okay, great. You all got your copy of the book, and it doesn't have to be this book. I choose a glow track. Choose something that has to do probably with health, and just give it away. Next Sabbath, we're going to take a little bit of time, and we're just going to listen to people stand up and tell how easy it was to give that book away. And I remember going into, I was driving down the road in Montrose, and I had a stack of these, and I thought, you know, we've done some business here at this laundromat. Just pulled in there, walked in, talked to the lady. I said, I got these books, and whatever. Set those books down right here. She says, I'll give them away when people come in here. So she's giving away books. There was a guy that's done some mechanic work for me, and I got to telling him about it. I left him a whole box of books, and he gives them away out of his shop. Why? They're health books, and his customers they appreciate it. Matter of fact, I can't really say I've ever had anybody say they don't want the book. You know, I mean, I suppose it would depend on the approach that you use, but usually if it's very casual and very friendly, you can leave the book with them. And particularly, they'll kind of look through it and they'll see in the book, you know, pictures of you know, a little girl eating watermelon. They'll look at it and they'll see this guy who's in a gymnasium working out on exercise, and they'll look through a guy climbing rock. I always tell them, don't do this, you won't live to 101. And when they'll look through that picture, and you know, you'll look at other things. Here's a guy drinking water, you know this kind of thing. I mean, it's just simple things. They'll look through that book. It's easy to give away. When you come back next Sabbath, I just want you to stand and give a little testimony and about a report. How was it on giving the book away? And they'll tell you, oh, I gave it to my neighbor, I did this, I did that. And it's just kind of very simple. Everybody has 60 seconds. Actually, most of the time it takes 10 seconds. Okay, at the end of the little testimony thing, say, well, good, I'm glad it went so well. You're each going to get 2 books this week. And so you ask, who would have 120 seconds? Well, basically what it does is that follows that same sequence up until 7 weeks. And you say, you know, on week 7, with all this practice, I'd like for you to give away 7 books, 1 book a day, 60 seconds a day, and then the program's over. That's all we want to do is just that. Well, when you add 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that's 28 books that we've given away. If you have a church of 100 people who have participated in the program, you've given away 2,800 books. You want to know what the biggest problem Seventh-day Adventists have in the community? It is Seventh-day Adventists knowing non-Seventh-day Adventists, making contact with them. We kind of tend to have a club. And yeah, I know them on a business sense. When I go to the elevator, I know the guys that take the grain off my truck. When I do this or do that, you know, in that sense, we know them. But to have a personal contact where I'm saying, this book has meant a lot to me. And by the way, the first week you're supposed to read the book. But anyway, I'm going to leave this little stack with you. I would tell you this. If this is something that your church wants to do, I can get you as many of these. It won't be this version. It'll be the better version, in my opinion, because the introduction is a little bit better and the front picture is a little bit better. But I can give these at Pacific Press to you for nothing. So just let me know, and if you want to try this 28 program, you will have invested maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and I can get the books for you. And so just write, let me know, and I'll have Pacific Press send it to you. And you can have those books to hand out. But if you have something else you'd rather use, great. Continue with it. But I'll leave these with you, and then you can take a look.
Thank you.
All right. Very good. I, again, have done all my advertising now. It's time to preach. Let's pray as we start. Our Father in heaven, I want to thank you for the privilege that you give us each day to be your witnesses. We don't know how to go about your work, but we know that if we ask your Holy Spirit into our hearts and lives, and we accept the wisdom from heaven, you will lead us. There are many people in this community that are longing and looking for hope. May we be the ambassadors of hope. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I want to spend just a little moment with you, and I assume what you guys get out of 3?
Yeah,
We're going to be Indonesians today,
Yeah.
because I know when they're in their home places, they stay longer.
Yeah, you were right. My wife and I we were speaking Indonesian at the beginning. We were missionaries for 16 years in Asia, and
Did you learn the language?
and then it's dangerous. It was very dangerous. But we were talking. He's told me I probably know more Indonesian than he does, because he spent his life here. But learning a language can be very interesting. But
Muy difícil.
I remember my wife and I were in Jakarta, and we went to a restaurant, and we'd had a few lessons in Indonesia, not very many. And my wife thought, well, this is a good time to practice my Indonesian. So the lady came up and she asked us in Indonesian, bahasa is what they call it, what do you want to eat? So my wife thought, well, I'll practice my bahasa. So she told the lady that she didn't eat meat. And the lady looked at her very surprised. And so she thought, well, I mispronounced it, I'll say it again. So she said it again. Finally, the lady at the next table came over. She said, I speak English, can I help you? My wife said, well, I'm just telling this lady we don't eat meat. And the lady said, oh, okay. She said, well, when you say I don't eat meat, you say, saya tidak makan daging. And she said, you're not saying daging. You're saying saya tidak makan gading. And you were changing. He's laughing already. You're changing the G and the D. And she said, you're telling this lady that you don't eat elephant tusks. So, no, with that beginning, we will begin. It was some years ago, and I was traveling in northern China. We were struggling to establish a presence across the country. Communism was still alive and well, still is today, but the rules were very tight. And I had traveled to the city of Harbin, China. It's in the north of China, and it has winters that have a lot in common with the winters in Siberia. It's very cold there. And I remember my task was to meet with some 2 church planters, 2 ladies that had gone to this big city to establish the first Seventh-day Adventist church. And it was a very difficult situation because we could not call them directly. I had to call someone in Hong Kong. And I told them, I'm here now. And they said, okay, just stand by your phone and we will call. And so I hung up. They made the telephone call to the church planters, the 2 ladies, and they said, okay, we're going to meet at a certain restaurant. They hung up. They called me back and said, this is the restaurant. Now, why did I not call them directly? Well, I didn't call them directly because that phone call would have been monitored. They would have listened to that. And they would have known exactly where we were going. I remember coming into that restaurant, and here sat these two ladies. And we sat down, and we introduced each other, and I began to hear the story of how the church plant was going in Harbin, China. They were two ladies that were excited about their work. I could tell they were enthusiastic. They had stories, and the translator could hardly keep up as they were talking, and he was talking in my ear. They told me about people that they had contacted, people that were interested, people that were coming to their groups, people they were praying with, people that they were studying the Bibles with. And they were doing this many times secretly, going here and there. And as they talked, and they just kept telling about the stories and things that were taking place, finally they stopped, looked at the watch and said, "Oh, we have to talk about some other things because the police will be here in about 30 minutes. And they said, you usually have about 1 hour before they discover and somebody comes down and starts checking. And, I began to listen. This lady, I knew that she lived 3 days bus ride away. Her husband and family lived there. She went home once a month to go there and to visit with them and would come back and then continue the work there. As I looked at them, I could tell from the clothes that they were wearing that I was looking into the face of sacrifice. They had kind of an old coat. They weren't what I would call ragged, but they were threadbare. One had a little burn on one side of it. But that didn't seem to bother them. The excitement that they had about doing the Lord's work. I found that the one lady had spent the weekend in prison a couple months ago because they found her with material that she was not to have in Harbin, China. As I looked at them and I listened to their stories, I knew that I was looking into the face of sacrifice, but I knew that I was looking into the face of two ladies that knew the King, and they were excited that Jesus was coming again. They believed it with all their heart. They were telling everybody. I will tell you that over the next few years, we did not end up with just one church in Harbin, China, but we ended up with the last I knew, we had 7 churches in Harbin, China, and they had been established there. It's been established there because there are people who believed that Jesus was coming again, and they knew that King. I want to talk to you about knowing the right King today. This community needs to know the right King. The state of Kansas, the Kansas-Nebraska Conference, the North American Division, the cities of the world. There are 543 of them that are larger than 1 million. And it is the place where Seventh-day Adventists are least represented. We are more of a rural church. We are more of an island church. But the large cities largely go unentered. It's a matter of having these massive populations know the right King. There are 2 choices. You can serve the King of heaven, or you can serve the King of this earth. It wasn't long ago that I saw a picture at Christmas time, and it was Jesus in the manger, and the sign below it said, the first king-size bed. I kind of chuckled about that. I know that we are familiar with the story of the wise men, and we often tell that story at Christmas time. But it may come to you as a little unusual for me to reference this story here in the month of August. But I want to talk about that just a little bit. You recall that there were 3 wise men, and there's some debate as to where they came from. But these wise men, they came to Herod the king. You can read that actually in Matthew, the 2nd chapter. If you have your Bibles, I invite you to open them. And they came to Herod, and in verse 2 they said, "Where is the other king? Where is the other king? And we want to worship him. We have seen his star." Well, when they said those words, you can find in verse 3 of chapter 2 that that's where the trouble began. Herod wasn't just the only one that was troubled. it said that all of Jerusalem was troubled. When the wise men asked this question, why were they troubled? Because they knew Herod. They knew Herod did not know the right king. They knew that Herod worshipped himself. So in verse 4, Herod demanded of the priests and of the scribes, he says, where will Christ be born? Where is he going to be born? Well, they did a little research, and of course that was well known in the Jewish community. And they said to him, well, Herod's going to be born in Bethlehem. Look at verse 5 and 6. Little did they know that they had just pronounced the death sentence on many young male babies in Bethlehem. And then they told him the real clincher that bothered Herod to the core. They said, a governor that shall rule my people, Israel.
Yeah.
That's what they said to him. Well, in verse 7, Herod asked them when the star appeared. And so they told him, well, as the star appeared about this time, well, you know, back in those days, there wasn't any question among people when life began. I'm sure Herod did the math, and he said, well, 9 months has gone by. That baby's got to be born here any time. And because they had told him. And, you know, as you look at chapter 2 and verse 8, it is a most interesting verse. And I would like you to look at that specifically. What does verse 8 says? It says, Herod gave the right instructions to them. He gave the right instructions to the wise men. He came to the right conclusion. Listen to this. He said, go to the place where you will find Jesus in Bethlehem. Search for him diligently. And when you have found him, share the news. Bring me word. And then Herod concluded by saying, because I want to come and worship him also. You know, Herod had it right. Go for him, search diligently, find him, share the news, worship him. He had it right. You know what the problem was? The problem was that he was serving the wrong king. He was serving the wrong king. He had lost track of the situation. He forgot that Jesus did not come to destroy him, but that Jesus had come to save him. I remember some years ago traveling in northern India, and I came into a city where they had planted a new church. And I asked the church planter, how did you begin to work here? Now, it sounds very strange in this environment, but it's not strange in India. He said, one day I was walking the streets, and I came across a young lady who was possessed of an evil spirit. And he said, I went to her parents, to her family, and I said to them, would you like me to ask my God, who is the most powerful God in the universe, to cast that evil spirit out? The parents and the family said, yes. Oh, if you could do that. The evil spirit has been horrible in her life. She falls, she cuts herself with knives, she falls into the fire, she burns herself. We always have her at the doctor trying to keep her alive. This young church planter, a layman of faith, he gathered the family, he brought that girl in, and he knelt down, and he prayed a prayer, and he asked that the great God of the universe would cast that evil spirit out. You know, God answered that prayer of faith. And I remember going and visiting in that home, and there that young girl was. And she told the story of how God had redeemed her life. Amen. He said, it's changed me. She said, I don't live in fear anymore. She says, I can hardly wait until the King comes and takes me to heaven. You know, again, I just thought, here is a young girl that knows the right king. He didn't come to destroy her. He came to save her. He came to give the world hope. and peace of mind. I want to have you turn in your Bibles, if you could, to Matthew, the 22nd chapter. I want to bring this knowing the right king home to us. This is a story that's very familiar to us. This story is the story of a king who had a son, and his son was going to be married. And the king, of course, was going to invite all of the right people to the wedding feast. And we know the story well. He sent out the invitations to the rich, the educated, the influential, the power brokers of the countryside and of the cities. And he said, "Come, my son is getting married and I'm inviting you to the wedding." Well, we know that in the story Jesus said that these individuals, they had their own business to take care of. Some went to the farm, others took care of their business and their businesses in the city, and they basically told the king, "We're not coming." Well, the king, he said, I'll send a second group of servants. And so he sent them out. He said, "Now this time urge them, tell them I really want them at the wedding feast." Well, as the servants arrived, the story indicates that they rose up and they beat the servants of the king, and they killed the servants of the king, and they told the king, "We are not coming." Well, the king had a way of dealing with them, and he sent his soldiers and destroyed them. But then comes the part of the story that I like the best. The king said, "I'm going to have people at my son's wedding." And it indicates that he sent the invitation out to everybody. Yes, people just on the street. Ordinary people. But it's very clear that he extended the invitation to the sinners, to the riffraff, the uneducated, the poor, those that you would least expect to come to the king's wedding. That's who he sent the invitation out to. And the Bible indicates that the wedding feast was filled with people. The king started walking around throughout the wedding feast. And here they all were gathered. People that he didn't even know. Dressed in the wedding garment. But as he walked around, he came to one man. And this man didn't have a wedding garment on. And he said, "Friend," he said, why don't you have your wedding garment on?" Do you recall in verse 12 what the response was of that man? What did he say?
He couldn't respond.
He said absolutely nothing. Nothing. Because he knew that that wedding garment was free at the door. I'm sure the king said, "Why weren't you wearing one? I was giving them away free. There was no cost to it. When you came in, let me look at you." This man, it's though he was saying, "I like my idea of wearing clothes better than your wedding garment." Friends, you know, this text and this story has a direct relationship to today. Let me share it with you. If you'll take and flip back in your Bibles to Revelation chapter 6, you will find that it is the opening of the sixth seal. The opening of the sixth seal in Revelation correlates with Matthew 24 because it talks about signs at the end of time. It talks about what's going to be taking place around us. And as you read through chapter 6, you can look at that and immediately you can begin to see the signs that John is revealing in chapter 6. And many of them harmonize with what we see in chapter 24. The people of the earth, the leaders of the earth, are living in fear. They don't know what to do. They don't know the answer, how to straighten the world out. Events are overtaking them. They live in fear. They're asking that the mountains will fall. Hide us in the caves. We don't even know what to do. Matter of fact, the situation is so bad, as it's described in chapter 6, that when John comes down to the end, look at verse 17. What does he say? In verse 17, that verse clearly says, John asks the question, who is going to be able to stand? Who's going to be able to even live through this? Who could possibly be saved? You know, I'm happy that John doesn't leave us with that question unanswered. Because when you look at chapter 7, just the next chapter, and you read down through that, you will come to a little answer that John provides. Who then is going to be able to stand? Look at verse 13 and 14. You remember that John was in vision. And he was in vision looking at heaven. And there was an elder that came up to John, and the elder said, "Hey, who are these people who are dressed in white robes?" The same white robes you're looking at in Matthew 22. Who are these? The elder asked John that. Well, what does John say? John says to the elder, "I don't know who they are. You would know better than I do. Why don't you tell me who they are?" And then the angel said to John, he said, "These are the people who came through the great tribulation." What great tribulation? The tribulation talking about in Revelation 6. Well, Revelation 6 is talking to you and me because it's this generation right before Jesus comes. They're the people who came through the great tribulation. That's who these people are. And he says they're here gathered around the throne for one reason. Look at it. What does it say? It says they're here because they took their dirty, filthy, ragged, wretched clothes and they washed them where? In the blood of the Lamb. They knew the right king. That is the answer to verse 17. Who's going to be able to stand? I'll tell you who's going to be able to stand at the end. It's going to be the people who have taken their lives and they've washed them in the blood of the Lamb. And they find the hope in the gospel. Friends, that is the message that we have for Colby, Kansas. It is the message that we have for this state, for the United States, for the world, every person that lives, every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. That's the message that we have. A message of hope.
Amen.
Some years ago, I was traveling in South Africa. And it was a country in which we've had marginal success in planting the church. South Africa in the past 30 or 40 years has gone through tremendous political turmoil. And yet, in that turmoil, we find that often when a country is in crisis, people actually are more receptive to hope, the Bible, the message that we have for them. And so we were planting quite a few churches. One of the church planters said, "Oh, I have a church I want you to come to. You have to come." Well, you know, I had meetings, we had training sessions, I had meetings with the officers of the division, and finally I said, okay, on Sabbath afternoon, I'll try to go with you to this new church plant. So I remember we were in Cape Town, and we got in the car and we drove a couple hours out of Cape Town. And I was wondering, you know, what kind of a new church plant. I'm always kind of excited to see it. Where are people at spiritually? How are we moving forward? What are we doing? That car pulled up in front of two massive gates. And I looked there on the sign, and the sign read, "Maximum Security Prison." And I thought, oh, okay, we have a church here in the prison. Probably have 3 or 4 people. And yeah, you know, that's always kind of a tough one because you don't know who you're going to be meeting with and what effect it is. And now, you know, I had some reservations, I have to admit. We came up to the office, registered, they knew him well. We went through those 30 gates, slamming behind us, walked into that maximum security prison, went upstairs on the 2nd floor, and I came into a room that had 54 men in it.
Oh, amen.
And I thought, wow. And you could tell that they had been riding the rough side of life. Greeted them, they greeted me. And then they began to sing in that African harmony that you can only find in Africa. And I remember they sang, "Redeemed how I love to proclaim it. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. And as they sang those songs, I could see tears in some of their eyes. It began to melt my heart a little bit. Well, maybe this is really a legitimate thing. You know, the more they sang. And then they had prayer. I've never attended a prayer session like that. People so thankful, full of joy for what Jesus had done, confessing, making things right between them right during the prayer session. As I listened to those songs and heard the prayers and the reading of the Scripture, I couldn't help but be so happy that I was a member of a church that was big enough to have them in it. It just thrilled me. Someday I'll see those. I don't know where they're going to be, whether they're going to be at the gate or they're probably going to be gathered around the throne. They will be so thrilled. Here I was seated in that room. 7 of them had committed multiple murders. They don't have the death penalty in South Africa. So they spend their life there. We came down toward the end of the worship hour. They said, well, we would like to take time to pray for your ministry. I thought, they're going to pray for my ministry. I mean, I ought to be praying that their sins are forgiven. But you know, I was looking into the face of people who knew the King. They knew him. They knew the right king. They'd given up that old king. You know, I don't know the situation for every person in this room. I don't know you personally. But if there is anyone in this room who feels like they have gone too far and they're outside the love, they can't put that wedding garment on, it's impossible for them, I want you to leave this church today with the assurance that you can wear the wedding garment. You can put it on. It can be yours. You can know the right king. That's a statement we should carry with passion in our hearts, because you know what? It'll change you. As you go out, you take this book, you take anything else, you meet people, they're going to see the King in your life. Those men in that prison gathered around me. Here they were praying for my ministry. As they ended that prayer, they sang a closing song. And I wrote the words down. I've never heard it sang anywhere else in my life. I wrote the words down to the chorus. They went like this. Don't have to be good enough to know Jesus. Don't have to be good enough to call upon his name. Don't have to be good enough to be covered with his blood. Don't have to be good enough for him to take away my shame. I looked at these redeemed lives of people that knew the King. And it touched me. It made my